Welcome back, everyone. I'm really glad that you are here today because we are going to have another one of those conversations that might challenge your perspective a little bit. And not just in your parenting, but in your relationships, and even, I would say, especially in the way you treat yourself. Today, I want to talk with you about punishment. So, as we begin, I just want you to sit with that word for a second and notice what thoughts and feelings come up for you. Because whenever I ask coaching clients to do this, they kind of have a few common responses. They'll either say something like, "Yes, I need to know how to do that better." Or they'll say, "Yes, now you're speaking my language." They've been waiting for this conversation. Or for some of them, they have a very real reaction of discomfort or maybe even fear, which is often what happens when old wounds from your childhood or past experiences are surfacing. Now, none of these responses is wrong. In fact, as a coach, they're usually the indicator of where to start this conversation. But in this setting, we're going to explore the big picture of punishment because I don't know where you land on it. We're going to just scratch the surface here. So, as you listen, if you have questions or feel like something could be explored more deeply, will you please reach out to me, either in the comments or in an email? This is a big topic, and I want to make sure you have all of your questions answered. So, if I get enough feedback, then we can dig deeper in another episode in the future. Okay? So, here we go. I want you to first imagine that your child does something they're not supposed to do. Maybe they hit or they lie about something. Maybe they're ignoring you and their pile of stuff is still sitting on the stairs after 3 days. That's a pretty common one in my house. In situations like this, your brain almost automatically goes to, okay, what's the consequence? Do they lose a privilege? Do they go sit in timeout? Do we take away the phone or cancel the play date? Maybe take away something that they care about. Because somewhere along the way, most of us were taught that this is what discipline is, right? Quote unquote, discipline. That if a child makes a poor choice, there needs to be a consequence that feels bad enough that they won't do that thing again. And we don't just believe this, you guys, we actually trust it. We trust that if they remember how much they hated that consequence, it will stick, that it will teach the lesson. But here's what I want to ask you today. Really, it's two questions. What if we're wrong? What if that's not actually how learning works? We rely on punishment so often to teach and correct and guide behavior, but what if it isn't really teaching at all? And I want to take this even further because this doesn't just happen in our parenting. We do this in our relationships too. When our partner disappoints us, we might not send them to a timeout. We might want to, but instead maybe we withdraw or we go quiet. We withhold affection or connection or communication. Or the opposite might be true. We might yell or vent about them to other people and drag their name through the mud. Or sometimes we even say things that we can't take back. We might think if they feel this distance or this wrath, they'll understand. We also do this with ourselves. When we fall short of expectations, either of other people or of our community or even our own, when we don't follow through or react in a way that we're not proud of, and when we don't do the things the way that we should do them, we punish ourselves with our thoughts. We tell ourselves we should be better, that we're failing, that we're not doing good enough, that we're not good enough, that we don't deserve happiness or joy or blessings, right? We go into self-sabotaging behavior. Maybe we eat too much, we don't eat enough, or we don't take care of our bodies enough. There's so many ways that we do this, right? This idea of punishment is not just a parenting thing, it's a pattern. So let's explore that pattern together, okay? Because we think punishment teaches lessons, but it might actually be getting in the way of the very learning that we're hoping for. So let's define what we're talking about. When we hear the word punishment, most of us picture something pretty obvious, right? A child sitting in timeout or a phone being taken away, privileges revoked. It might even bring up a picture of spanking or hair pulling or soap in the mouth. There's no judgment if that's part of how you see punishment, all right? Those are very real experiences of a lot of people. These are all considered more traditional, visible forms of what the world describes as discipline. Okay, again, quote unquote, discipline. You will only hear me refer to it as punishment because discipline is something entirely different, but that's a conversation for another time. When we look at the definition of punishment, though, it's actually much broader than that. Okay, so in the dictionary, punishment is defined as this: inflicting or imposing a restriction, suffering, or undesired consequence on someone because they have committed an offense. And when you look at it that way, it starts to include a lot more than we might initially think, because punishment isn't just about what we do, it's also about what we withhold or what we're not doing, right? And once you start seeing it through that lens, you begin to notice how often it shows up in ways that don't look like discipline at all. Okay, so in parenting, yes, it might be consequences and restrictions, but in relationships, punishment can look like shutting down instead of communicating, withholding affection or pulling away emotionally, being vindictive or spiteful, or speaking with contempt, or deciding, you know what, if you're going to act like that, I am not going to show up for you in this particular way. And sometimes it goes even quieter than that. All right. It's the moment where we see someone else struggling, whether it's our kid or our partner or someone that we work with, even. And instead of offering help, we think they need to learn this lesson and I'm going to teach them, even if it hurts. That is punishment. And then there's this way that we turn it inward because we don't just punish other people, we punish ourselves. We restrict rest when we feel like we haven't earned it. We pile on pressure when we're already overwhelmed. And we speak to ourselves, our inner dialogue, in ways that we would never speak to someone that we love. We withdraw compassion from ourselves as a way to motivate or correct or like do better next time. But no matter how you frame it, it's still punishment. So this isn't just about whether or not you use timeouts or take away privileges. This is about a much deeper pattern of if something goes wrong, someone needs to feel it. And usually that someone ends up being our kids, our partner, or ourselves. And when you start to see punishment this way, you really can't unsee it. So if punishment doesn't always do what we hope it will do, then why do we go there so quickly? Why does it feel so automatic? And I think when you really look at it, there's a few very human reasons that drive this behavior. Not because we're trying to harm or hurt people, but because we're trying to solve something or relieve something in the moment. So here are 4 of the big reasons that we default to punishment based on the work that I have done with parents, all right? These 4 categories aren't all inclusive, but a lot of parents fall into one or more of these in some way. So the first one, we punish to feel effective. Sometimes punishment just gives us a sense that we're doing something. When situations feel chaotic or frustrating or like we're out of control, taking something away or enforcing a consequence, making a decision in that moment, it gives us this sense of action. Like, okay, I handled that. Even if underneath it, nothing has actually been resolved. It soothes our discomfort to feel decisive. Okay? All right, the second one, we punish to even the score. Now, this one is a little harder to admit, but it is there. So I want you to really think about this. There's a part of us that when something feels unfair or hard, we might think, you know what? I went through this, so you should have to go through it too. You see this in parenting, and it sounds like, hey, no one helped me with this. You'll figure it out just like I did. Or I had consequences, so you will too. In a relationship, it might sound a little bit like, you know what? If I felt hurt, you should feel hurt also. It's that quiet belief that fairness means shared suffering. So the third reason that we punish is to teach a lesson. And this is probably the most common one and the most socially accepted. All right, we generally believe that if this feels bad enough, they won't do it again. That somehow discomfort or suffering will make the lesson stick. That it's somehow our role or our responsibility to be the one who delivers that hard lesson. Almost like it's a form of guidance or even care. But we rarely stop to ask, is this pain actually teaching the lesson? Or is it just making the experience memorable? All right. We're actually going to dig into that more in just a minute, but I want you to keep that question in your mind. Then there's the 4th category, and that is that we punish to establish control. That feeling of, I need to make sure this doesn't happen again. I need to make sure they listen. I need to make sure that things don't spiral out of control. All right. Punishment can feel like a way to reassert power, to say, don't forget who's in charge. It's me. Going into the framework of power dynamics, this is the power over dynamic, or asserting dominance. As adults, there are a lot of reasons we feel dominant over other people, and I've heard a lot of them. Because of gender, like I'm the man of the house sort of energy. Because of authority, like I'm the parent, that's why. Or because we feel smarter or more experienced, or we feel like we deserve respect because we are the adult. Now, I'm not saying that any of these are good reasons to use power over, but they are real reasons that people feel very justified in. And when you step back and look at all of these, they make sense. Of course, we want to feel effective. Of course, we want things to feel fair. Of course, we want to teach and guide and prevent future problems. Of course, we want sense of control, right? None of those desires are wrong, but the strategy we've learned to accomplish those things, which is punishment, is often solving our immediate discomfort, not the deeper outcome we actually want. And that's where we're going to go next, because before we can change the pattern, we have to understand where that pattern came from in the first place. Now, if you're listening to this and starting to recognize yourself in some of these patterns, maybe you're feeling a little uncomfortable or even a little guilty, I don't want you to stay there. All right? I want you to understand this. Punishment is a learned behavior. This isn't something you just came up with on your own. This is something you were shown. It's what many of us experienced growing up. It's how we were disciplined. It's how consequences were explained to us. We learned very early on that when something went wrong, there would be some form of discomfort tied to it. Maybe it was punishment that felt obvious, like getting grounded, or maybe it was more subtle, like the silent treatment. The message was still the same. If you do something wrong, something bad will follow. And over time, that wiring starts to become familiar. So when we're in a moment of stress, when our child is acting out, or our partner disappoints us, or we feel like we failed, our brain doesn't pause and ask, what's the most effective way to handle this? It just goes to what it knows. It goes to what's familiar. And for a lot of us, that's punishment. Not because it's the best option, but because it is the most familiar one. It's what we saw modeled to us. It's what was normalized in our homes growing up. It's what felt like discipline, okay? And I think this matters so much because it changes the tone of this conversation quite a bit. Because this isn't about blaming yourself for getting it wrong. I promise I am not trying to punish you for having these patterns in this conversation. This is about recognizing a pattern that you were given and deciding with awareness whether or not you want to keep using it. We repeat what we are shown until we become aware enough to choose something different. So if punishment is learned and it's familiar and it gives us this sense of action and control in the moment, why doesn't it create the kind of change we're actually hoping for? Why does the same behavior keep happening? Why do we find ourselves repeating the same cycles? To understand that, we have to look at what's happening beneath the surface, especially in our brain and in our body. So let's talk nervous system science for just a minute, okay? When someone feels punished, whether it's a child, a partner, even you, they don't just register the lesson. They register the threat. Now that might sound dramatic, but from a nervous system perspective, it's true. When there's shame or fear or disconnection or a sense of being controlled, the brain shifts out of a learning state and into a survival state. All right, now this is fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. You've heard those responses before. And you might see this come out as defensiveness or avoidance or submission or pushing back even harder. And when we're in those states, the part of the brain that's responsible for reflection and learning and long-term change, it goes offline. So even if there's a moment where it looks like the lesson landed, what often actually gets encoded is something completely different. It's not, I understand why this matters. Instead, it's, I need to avoid getting caught next time. Or I need to stay away from this person when they're upset. Or something is wrong with me. Or I just need to get through this. All right. So for a lot of us, it means that when we got in trouble, I didn't just learn not to lie, I learned to lie better and to not get caught. All right. So maybe that's a situation that kind of relates there. This is where I think we have to question what many of us have been taught. Okay. So remember that question from earlier that I wanted you to think about. Is the pain actually teaching the lesson, or is it just making the experience unforgettable? Because those are not the same thing. You can remember something really vividly, but still not understand it. You can feel the impact of a punishment and still not have the skills to do something differently next time. And this doesn't just apply to kids. Think about your own life for a minute. If pain were actually the best teacher, wouldn't most of us be fully healed by now? Because we've all experienced mistakes and consequences and hard things and emotional pain, and yet we still find ourselves repeating patterns that we wish we could change. Not because we didn't suffer enough, we all have suffered, but because suffering on its own doesn't create clarity, and it doesn't build skills, and it doesn't lead to growth automatically. So when we're relying on punishment, we might get that short-term compliance that we need in the moment. Things might stop, right? The behavior might change. In that moment, we feel better, but long-term, it often is creating disconnection and resentment and shame or avoidance of these issues that make our relationships incredibly challenging. We get that instead of the understanding and responsibility and meaningful change that we're wanting. Okay? Now we're getting somewhere. Because if punishment isn't actually doing the job we thought it was, then now we have to ask a different question. And that's not, how do I punish them more effectively? Which is why a lot of parents come to me. They want to learn how to discipline their children better. But instead, we're asking, how do I actually help someone learn and grow and take responsibility without relying on pain to get them there? I'm definitely not saying that moving away from punishment means letting things slide or avoiding consequences or pretending that behavior doesn't matter. Okay, this is not about becoming permissive. What's really happening is it's really about becoming intentional. All right. So the key shift here is moving from punishment to accountability. And those two things are not the same. Punishment says you did something wrong and now you need to suffer for it. It focuses on the past, on whatever the mistake was, and the discomfort that is tied to it as a result. All right. But accountability says something completely different. It says something happened, and now we need to try and understand it, take responsibility for it, and figure out together what to do next. It focuses on awareness and ownership and repair and makes it possible for future change. Punishment is about making sure it hurts enough to remember, and accountability is about making sure it's clear enough to understand and integrate. And when you look at it this way, you can start to see how differently this plays out in real life. So with a child, punishment might look like go to your room, you've lost your tablet, all of those things. And maybe that behavior stops the moment. But accountability in those situations sounds more like, hey, what happened here? Or how do you think that affected others? Or what do you think needs to be repaired? What can we do differently next time? It doesn't mean there are no limits. It means the focus shifts from the penalty to responsibility. Now, in a partnership, because we're talking about these three layers here, in a partnership, punishment might look like withdrawing or giving the silent treatment or withholding affection or intimacy. But accountability sounds like that hurt, and this is why. This is what I need moving forward. How do we move past this together? And with yourself, punishment sounds like, oh, I can't believe I did that, or what's wrong with me? Accountability then sounds like that didn't go the way I wanted. What was going on for me in that moment? What support or change do I need moving forward? Do you feel the difference there? One is rooted in shame and reaction, and the other is rooted in awareness and growth. And this is why punishment so often misses the mark. Because even when behavior changes on the outside, accountability is what creates change on the inside. The goal isn't to make someone remember the pain, it's to help them understand the impact. And when someone truly understands the impact of their actions, they're far more likely to choose differently. Not because they're afraid, but because they get it. So if we're moving away from punishment and toward accountability, what does that actually look like and how do we do it? Because when emotions are high or something big just happened, you still need something to do. And this is where I want to offer you 3 simple steps, okay? Not because it's easy, but because it gives you something to come back to, a treatment for you if you listened to last week's episode, okay? So the first step is you need to regulate first. Before you correct, before you teach, before you decide on any kind of response at all, you regulate. Because if you're dysregulated or triggered or overwhelmed, you're not actually teaching, you're reacting. And that's usually when punishment shows up the fastest. So don't just ignore what happened, create enough space so that you can respond with intention. Now that means calming your own nervous system. So take a break, take a breath. Wait a minute to process your thoughts or your feelings, your fears, and your intentions. Make sure they're aligned with your values. Okay, the second step, shift towards responsibility. Now, once there's a little bit more calm, this now is when you start to guide the learning. So instead of focusing on consequences, I want you to ask better questions. What happened? What was the impact? What can we repair? What can be done differently next time? This is where accountability comes in, because the goal isn't just to stop the behavior, it's to build the skills, right, to close that gap between what we don't know and what we do know, right? So we're giving them the skills that make different behavior possible next time. And the third one is hold boundaries without harm. And this is the part people worry about because it can feel like, look, if I'm not using punishment, how do I keep structure? How do I stay in charge? And the answer is simple. You hold boundaries. You don't just use pain to enforce boundaries, okay? You hold the boundary. Now remember, a boundary is not, you hurt me, so now I'm going to take something from you, okay? That's not a boundary. A boundary sounds more like, this is what works, and this is what doesn't, and here's what's gonna happen next. So that might sound something like, if homework isn't done, then the screens turn off until it is. I'm not gonna keep talking if I'm being yelled at. Or we can try again when things are calmer. Clear, consistent, but not rooted in shame or retaliation or control. Okay, they're rooted in connection because when someone feels safe and seen and supported, they're far more open to learning and doing things differently next time. And there's no age limit here either. This works with 3-year-olds, it works with teenagers, and it's true for adults too. So instead of punishment, what you're really starting to build then is regulation and responsibility and respectful boundaries. All right. Now, before we close, I do want to come back and touch on something that we talked about earlier, because for most of us, the most consistent and most intense form of punishment in our lives isn't what we do to other people. It's what we're doing to ourselves. It's the way we talk to ourselves when we feel like we don't measure up. We don't just notice it. We come down on ourselves hard. And if you really look at it, it's exactly the same pattern. If something goes wrong, someone needs to feel it. And when there's no one else to direct that toward, we turn inward. But I want you to really think about this. Has that ever actually helped you grow? Has being mean to yourself made you more patient or more consistent or more connected? Or has it just made you feel more anxious and more discouraged and more stuck? Because just like with punishment that's outward, right, out here, self-punishment doesn't build any skills or support any real change. So what would it look like to respond to yourself with accountability instead of punishment? It doesn't mean you're ignoring things. It doesn't mean you're just making excuses for your own behavior. It means you're staying in the process without turning against yourself. All right. If we're really trying to raise other humans who are taking responsibility and repairing when it's needed and growing through these experiences, then you guys, we have to do that too. All right. So now let's go back to where we started. That moment where something happens, a behavior, a mistake, a reaction, and your mind immediately goes to, what's the consequence? Here's what I'm inviting you to do. It's not to ignore that instinct. It's simply to get curious about it. To pause just for a minute, just for a second even, and ask yourself, am I trying to teach right now? Or am I trying to control discomfort? Because when we rely on punishment, it often feels really powerful in the moment, like we're doing something, like we're taking control, like we're making sure this won't happen again, like we're teaching the lesson. But in the long run, punishment can create distance, where what we actually want is connection. It creates shame when we actually want responsibility, and it can create fear where we actually want understanding. That doesn't mean you stop guiding. It doesn't mean you stop holding those boundaries. It just means you change how you do it. All right, so regulate first. Focus on responsibility. Hold boundaries without harm. And maybe, most importantly, start noticing the places where you've been punishing yourself. Because growth doesn't require suffering, and change doesn't require shame. And learning doesn't come from how much something hurts, it comes from how clearly it's understood. All right? You don't have to make someone hurt to help them grow. So this week, just notice. Notice when that urge to punish shows up with your kids, with your partner, or with yourself. And instead of automatically following it, just pause, get curious, and see if you can choose something different. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I know I've probably given you a lot to think about. If you have a moment, it would mean so much if you could leave a 5-star review so we can reach more of the parents who are ready for change. I will see you next time here in the Parenting Lab, where we'll continue to explore the art and science of parenting and put your parenting to the test. I'll see you all again next week. Take care.